Washington, D.C. Federal Courthouse 8:02 a.m. Rain tapped gently against the towering marble columns like a subtle warning. Inside courtroom 3, silence wrapped itself around every corner like fog refusing to lift. Not a whisper above breath, not a footfall unmeasured. The courtroom clerk moved like a shadow, placing folders on polished benches. Bailiffs stood rigid against the walls, not speaking, not blinking. Even the light overhead dimmed slightly, as though the very building knew something extraordinary was about to unfold. Then, slam, the heavy oak doors at the rear of the courtroom burst open with theatrical finality. The room stiffened. Authority had arrived. Judge Gregory Halden, a man carved by 27 years of unchecked power, strode down the aisle in his black robe, sharp-edged and starched to military precision. Every step thudded like a countdown. His gaze was steel, his jaw locked, his pace deliberate. He wasn't just entering the courtroom, he was claiming dominion. "No coffee," he barked, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Not in my courtroom. Not today. Not ever." The young clerk beside him, no more than 25, flinched. Her hand hovered uncertainly over a foam cup. Judge Halden swatted it from the desk with a brutal flick. Coffee splashed across her notes. She didn't move. No one dared to. He climbed to the bench slowly, each step calculated. He turned, surveying the gallery like a warden overseeing a prison camp. His eyes were knives, cutting, probing, daring anyone to move. "I don't want noise. I don't want glances. I want obedience." The tension in the room sharpened like a blade honed too fine. Attorneys held their breath. Observers glanced downward. Even the air seemed to hold back. A beat, then another. The judge spun his gavel between his fingers like a gambler about to call a bluff. "And someone tell that defense team," he added coldly, "if they're not here in 2 minutes, they'll be spending the night in lockup thinking about punctuality." Behind him, a bailiff adjusted his collar. Sweat trickled despite the courtroom's cool air. Something was different today. The judge wasn't just irritated, he was on edge. He flipped open a leather folder, skimming a file. Then he paused. His eyes stopped, fixed on a single name. A twitch of his lip. A narrowing of his gaze. "Remind me," he said tightly, "who's testifying for the defense?" The clerk cleared her throat, hesitated, then answered. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Your Honor." The name landed like a spark in dry timber. "Of course," Halden muttered, dragging the words like a chain. "Of course she is." He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The name itself did the work. A ripple passed through the room. The bailiffs shifted. Journalists leaned forward just a touch. Something was about to happen. Something seismic. Back of the gallery, Rosa Freeman sat quietly in the rear row. 83 years old, dignified, navy coat buttoned to her throat. A black hat rested gently on her silver curls. Her hands folded in her lap like she was in church. She didn't belong to this courtroom, but it belonged to her. This was the same place where, weeks earlier, a ruling had stripped her of the home she'd lived in since 1962. A modest house bought by her husband after Vietnam. She'd raised children there, buried 2 of them, built a life in that space. And in 10 minutes, with no argument allowed and no voice heard, it was taken. Now, she had returned. Same court, same judge, but something was different. The whispers had started that morning in the hallway. "Did you hear? She's coming. Jasmine Crockett? She's testifying. Today." Rosa's lips barely moved, but a breath escaped her chest. Hope wasn't something she allowed herself anymore. But it stirred now, quiet, cautious. Outside, just beyond the doors. The buzz intensified. Reporters checked recorders. Cameramen adjusted lenses. A clerk murmured to a colleague. "She's here." Inside the courtroom, Judge Halden stilled. His posture changed, subtle but real. His fingers stopped spinning the gavel. His expression cooled from steel to stone. He turned slightly toward his clerk. "This testimony," he said under his breath. "Was it cleared through protocol?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. "Filed 3 days ago by the defense. Proper channels." Interesting, Halden said, flat. Must have been buried beneath the avalanche of garbage I receive daily. He turned his gaze to the doors, eyes narrowing like a general bracing for a siege. Then, a moment later, the doors opened, not with a bang, but a deliberate creak. Jasmine Crockett entered, no entourage, no performance, a slate gray pantsuit, shoulders sharp, curls pulled back tightly, a single leather folder in her hand. She walked with the quiet precision of a surgeon. No fear, no hesitation. The air shifted, not with noise but with pressure. Every eye in the room turned, and every breath was held. Even Halden's eyes widened a fraction. Jasmine Crockett had arrived not to perform, not to preach, but to testify. To speak the kind of truth that didn't ask permission. She moved with calm purpose toward the stand. Her eyes swept briefly across the gallery, locking for a split second with Rosa Freeman. A nod, respect, recognition. Then she faced the judge. Halden leaned into the mic. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, every syllable wrapped in disdain. "I trust you understand this is a court of law, not a stage for political theater." Jasmine didn't blink. Her voice was steady, even. "Perfectly, Your Honor. I'm here as a sworn witness, not a headline." The clerk approached with the Bible. Jasmine placed her hand on it. No tremor, no pause. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." It was ordinary, routine, and yet, something shifted again. Like the moment before a dam cracks. The judge's bench. Halden tapped his gavel once. The sound was sharp, unnecessary. "Take the stand," he snapped. "And keep it brief. This court has no time for grandstanding." "Neither do I," Jasmine replied, stepping up. She sat, back straight, shoulders squared, not defiant, disciplined. She looked not at Halden but through him, as though already reading the weak spots in his armor. The room was silent, electric. The court reporter tapped the record. "Let the record show the witness is present and under oath." "Proceed," Halden growled, but something beneath his robe had begun to unravel. And Jasmine knew it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The power in the room had begun to shift. And the judge, for the first time in a long time, was not holding the gavel tightly enough. The courtroom was still in the way a forest stills before lightning strikes. Jasmine Crockett adjusted the microphone. Her fingers were calm, surgical, as if every breath she took had already been measured. Attorney Malcolm Price stood at the defense table. He was seasoned, 30 years in civil litigation, but today, even his hands trembled slightly. He cleared his throat, eyes flicking from Jasmine to Judge Halden. "Your Honor, the defense would like to begin by establishing the historical context of Mrs. Freeman's property acquisition and—" Halden cut in, voice laced with disdain. "This isn't a history seminar, counselor. I asked for relevance, not bedtime stories." Price inhaled, swallowed the interruption. "With respect, Your Honor, the defense intends to demonstrate a pattern." "I've read your exhibits," Halden snapped. "There is no pattern. I see a plaintiff who failed to keep up with zoning updates and now wants to cry foul." "Objection. Overruled," Halden barked, slamming the gavel before the sentence could finish. A ripple passed through the gallery. Small glances exchanged. Postures shifted. Unease crept across the room like cold fog on skin. Jasmine remained still. She didn't flinch, but her grip on the folder in her lap tightened slightly. A signal. She wasn't surprised. She was ready. Price tried again. "If the court would permit, Congresswoman Crockett has." "The court will not permit," Halden barked. "She is a witness, not a keynote speaker." It stung. He wanted it to. It was designed to cut her down, to box her in before she even started. But Jasmine didn't blink. Instead, she raised her hand. Calm, poised, measured. The room stilled again. Halden turned toward her, amused. "What now? You'd like to object to your own judge?" "No, Your Honor," she said evenly. "I'd like to clarify the basis for my testimony." "With your permission." The air thickened. Even the bailiff turned slightly to listen. Halden leaned back, tapping his chair arm with one knuckle, considering. "You'll keep it brief," he muttered. "And if I hear even one buzzword about systemic injustice, I'll hold you in contempt." Jasmine nodded, not submissively, but like a queen acknowledging the battlefield. "Understood," she said. She turned to face the gallery. Then slowly, back to the judge. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but it carried. "Mrs. Freeman's home was purchased with veteran benefits in 1962, Jasmine began. She's never missed a tax payment. Never defaulted. Never transferred the deed." A pause. "The only irregularity occurred during the rezoning effort in 2021, where over 90% of impacted residents were elderly, black, and received no legal notice of the change." A flicker in Halden's eye. He shifted, ever so slightly. "My role here is not political," Jasmine continued. "It's personal. I've known Mrs. Freeman since I was in law school. I've walked her neighborhood. I've seen the pattern." She paused again, surgical. "Intentional. And I believe this court is about to see it too." The gallery stirred. Not loud, not dramatic, but palpable. Halden tapped his gavel again, not to interrupt, but to remind himself he still held it. But even he felt it now. Something had tipped. Jasmine opened her folder. The first page slid free. Her fingers were exact. No dramatics. No flair. Just truth dressed in stillness. "Your Honor," she said. "In reviewing the prosecution's timeline, I noticed something absent." Halden exhaled hard. His eyes rolled. "Here we go. The zoning proposal 21C, filed March 15, 2021, is referenced in the prosecution's exhibit list, but the actual meeting transcript from April 2 is not." Halden frowned. "You're referring to a document never entered during discovery?" "Exactly," Jasmine said. "And yet, the resolutions that stem from that meeting are cited as foundational to the state's denial of resident notice." More shifting in seats. More subtle glances. The courtroom was listening now. "And those resolutions," she continued, "were used to justify removing Mrs. Freeman's home from residential zoning protection." She let it hang there. "In other words, this court has made decisions based on partial evidence." Halden's jaw twitched. "That's a bold assertion," he snapped. "It's not an assertion," Jasmine replied. "It's a page number." She flipped a sheet forward. Held it up. "Page 14 of this internal memo from the Zoning Compliance Committee, dated April 3, explicitly states, no residential notice was issued to addresses within new designation zones." "Their reasoning?" She looked up. "They called it non-essential reclassification." Halden scoffed. "That's not legal language." "No," Jasmine said. "It's developer language." Now it rippled. Real ripples. Reporters leaned in. The prosecutor looked down. A woman in the second row gasped. Jasmine continued. "Mrs. Freeman's home wasn't forgotten. It was categorized out of legal notice. And the one document that explains why? Never made it into the defense's hands until now." She paused again. Not for effect, but for clarity. And the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Calculating. Everyone in the room was doing the same math. What else was missing? Halden sat up straighter, visibly rattled. "This document," he said. "How did you obtain it?" "Freedom of Information Act request," Jasmine replied. "Filed 6 months ago. We received it last Thursday." "Convenient timing." "Inconvenient truth," she replied. The phrase struck hard. Even the court reporter blinked. A courtroom officer coughed into his sleeve. Rosa Freeman sat up a little taller. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't look triumphant. She was steady, focused. "Truth, Your Honor," she said gently. "The kind that doesn't care when it arrives. Only that it does." From the gallery, tension thickened. From the bench, silence deepened. And Jasmine flipped another page. She wasn't done. Not even close. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her composure filled the space louder than thunder. Her stillness had gravity. She flipped another page in the folder and looked squarely at Judge Halden. Her voice, still level, carried like a scalpel slicing through pretense. "Your Honor," she said, This next exhibit is a verified bank transaction dated March 12, 2021. A pause. It shows a direct transfer of $250,000 from a political advocacy fund operated by the Citadel Alliance. She turned the page to an account belonging to one Gregory Halden. Gasps, real ones, finally erupted. Not just murmurs, reaction. A pen dropped. The court reporter blinked and froze, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. Even the prosecutor's shoulders jerked back. Judge Halden's face drained of color. His jaw sat like concrete. "This is slander," he barked. "This is not part of the official case file." Jasmine didn't flinch. She was past fear now. "It was verified this morning," she replied, "by the Federal Banking Ethics Office. Cross-referenced against campaign disclosures and subpoenaed shell corporations tied to Citadel's general fund." Halden stood. A crack in tradition. He never stood. Not for murder trials. Not for racketeering. Not for senators under investigation. But now, he rose, hand gripping the bench like a man losing balance on a crumbling ledge. "I said, it's inadmissible," he growled. "That information was not submitted through proper pre-trial channels. It is to be stricken from the record." But his voice no longer carried command. It carried panic. A strange quiet flooded the room. And then Jasmine, softly. "Let the record show that this court has actively refused to hear evidence of financial conflict involving the presiding judge." The court reporter hesitated, looked at Halden, then resumed typing. Halden turned toward her, voice hoarse. "Strike that last sentence." She paused. Her fingers hovered, but no one moved, because no one believed the gavel anymore. Jasmine reached for another sheet. "Page 3, she said. "Wire transfer logs linking Citadel's subsidiary Shell account to 3 other federal judges." She laid the pages down. All issued within a 48-hour window. All tied to high-profile land rulings in majority-black neighborhoods. Halden staggered. "This is a setup," he hissed. "A political ambush. Fabricated by your office and your activist cronies." Jasmine's reply was a whisper, but it struck like stone. "No, this is math." The gallery began to move, shoulders squaring, phones slipping from pockets, pens racing again. Rosa Freeman's chin lifted. Jasmine turned another page. This time, her voice slowed. "June 3rd, she said. $300,000, 1 day before the Hernandez eviction hearing. Testimony from 3 neighbors struck from record for being circumstantial." She looked at Halden. "Would Your Honor like to explain why these payments coincidentally align with rulings that benefited Citadel?" Halden's mouth opened, but no words emerged. And the silence that followed didn't shield him. It accused him. Across the courtroom, the clerk, Mary Ann Cole, 29, always precise, sat pale and motionless behind her monitor. Her hands trembled slightly. Then, without warning, she stood. It was unsteady, quiet, but undeniable. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice breaking but audible. Halden spun around. "Mary Ann, don't," she continued. "He told me they weren't relevant. That if I flagged the files, I'd be reassigned. That it would ruin everything." Jasmine didn't interrupt. She simply let truth breathe. Mary Ann's voice cracked again. "The Freeman file wasn't missing. It was deleted. I did it, because he told me to." A gasp swept the courtroom. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Even the prosecutor dropped his pen. Halden's face twisted with fury and disbelief. "This is a lie. You're being manipulated." But Mary Ann was no longer looking at him. She was looking at Jasmine. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know it would go this far." Jasmine gave a single, solemn nod. Recognition, not absolution. Halden turned to the officers lining the rear. "Guards," he bellowed. "Remove her. Arrest her. She's destroying this court with lies." The 2 bailiffs looked at each other, unsure. "What are you waiting for?" Halden screamed. "That is a judicial order." And then, Jasmine stepped forward. Her voice did not rise. "On what grounds, Your Honor?" The question was calm, but seismic. Halden's voice cracked. "Contempt, disruption, Fabricated evidence, take your pick. But he didn't sound like a judge. He sounded like a man slipping underwater. Jasmine stepped up to the witness box again. She opened the final tab in her folder. These, she said, holding up a slim flash drive, are audio and video files. Obtained legally under whistleblower protections. She walked to the bench, not too close, and laid the drive gently beside the gavel. Then, softly, the first file captures a conversation where Your Honor instructs staff to delete digital records tied to the Freeman and Bellamy cases. The courtroom gasped again. No one even pretended to hide their reactions now. And the second, she added, is surveillance footage of you entering your chambers at 11:16 p.m., less than an hour after receiving a wire transfer from Citadel. Halden stood frozen. The folder in your hand, Judge Halden, she said, voice like a blade, is the same folder you were holding in that footage. It never entered the evidence process. The judge didn't reach for it. He just stood there, face drained, knuckles white. Then came the sound. Boots. Deliberate, heavy, echoing from the hallway. The rear doors creaked open. 4 men in dark suits, federal badges flashing, stepped inside. No words, no warning, just authority without performance. The lead agent approached the bench. Calm, professional. Judge Gregory A. Halden, he said evenly. Pursuant to sealed federal indictment, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Silence struck. Real silence. The kind that comes when the world finally admits it was wrong. The agent continued, you are to be remanded immediately into federal custody. Halden stood paralyzed. Then, this is outrageous, he snapped. I am a federal judge. You can't. The agent cut him off with a single sentence that ended his era. Sir, with respect, this stopped being your courtroom the moment you violated your oath. The handcuffs hadn't clicked yet, but in every way that mattered, Gregory Halden was already caught. The agent stood before him, unmoving, unreadable. Their presence alone stripped the bench of its sanctuary. For decades, this courtroom had been his stage, his throne. Now it was a spotlight. And he was exposed. The lead agent reached for Halden's wrist. But Halden snapped back, voice sharp. Don't touch me. The room jolted. You think you can do this to me? In my courtroom? He barked. I am a federal judge. No one answered. Halden turned, face flushed, robe half off his shoulder. His eyes locked on Jasmine like a blade thrown across the room. This is your doing, he spat. Your circus. Your lies. Jasmine stood still. She didn't blink. She didn't recoil. She simply watched him the way sunlight watches a shadow fade. You're not here for justice, he roared. You're here to humiliate me. To burn this institution to the ground. He turned to the jury. I've ruled for 27 years, he shouted. I've upheld the law through scandals, through war, through politics. But no one looked proud. No one looked grateful. They looked like they were watching a statue crumble. Then came the final crack. I am the law, he bellowed. And this time, his voice echoed with desperation, not authority. He didn't sound powerful. He sounded scared. Jasmine stepped forward slowly, not as a challenger, but as the truth walking toward a collapsing lie. You're not the law, she said. You're the one who violated it. It wasn't defiance. It was clarity. And the gallery felt it like a verdict. Halden took a half-step back, as if her words had physically struck him. One of the agents moved again. This time, Halden didn't resist. His shoulders slumped, and when the first cuff clicked shut, it wasn't the sound of metal. It was the sound of legacy shattering. They turned him around, slowly. The robe tangled around his wrists. His hands shook, not from cold, but from the realization that for the first time in his life, no one was obeying. He wasn't ruling. He was being read his rights. You have the right to remain silent. The words were familiar. He had spoken them countless times. But never from this side of the bench. And this time, they weren't a ritual. They were justice coming for him. As the agents guided him down the aisle, every step felt like a mile. He passed the jury. No one met his gaze. He passed the prosecution table. The assistant DA stared at his own folded hands. He passed Rosa Freeman, still seated. She looked at him, calm, still, no vengeance in her eyes. Only history. A history that had watched men like him decide who got to speak and who didn't. Who got to stay and who was erased. And now, that history watched him go. 3 rows from the door, a sound echoed. Clack. The judge's gavel, once feared, fell from the edge of the bench and hit the marble floor. It didn't bounce. It didn't roll. It simply landed flat, handle out, head tilted, and no one moved to pick it up. Not the clerk, not the prosecutor, not the judge. It lay there, a monument not to power but to its illusion. Like a crown that means nothing once the face beneath it has been revealed. Halden turned his head once, met Jasmine's gaze. No words passed, but in his eyes, finally, was the recognition that this wasn't a performance. This was a reckoning. And Jasmine? She didn't look angry. She looked resolved, like a lighthouse watching the storm break itself apart. Outside, the faint wail of sirens floated toward the courthouse. Not frantic, just inevitable. The agents pushed the doors open. Light spilled in, and Halden's shadow stretched long across the stone floor. It was not tall anymore. It was fractured, split by the boots of the men beside him. The doors closed. Gregory Halden was gone, and in the gallery, no one clapped. No one cheered, because this wasn't a victory parade. It was a burial of a lie that had lived too long. Jasmine stepped forward, slowly. She approached the bench, not to replace him, but to see what remained. Her eyes fell on the gavel, still lying cold and forgotten. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. It had already fallen, and so had everything it once claimed to represent. 3 days later, the silence finally broke. Not with headlines, not with cable news, but in whispers, in courthouse hallways, in back-office emails, in nervous glances exchanged between those who used to feel untouchable. The fall of Gregory Halden had cracked the dam. And now, the flood was coming. Within 72 hours, 4 more federal judges were placed under investigation. Judge Linford of Western Maryland, Judge Serrano in Virginia, Judge Brinkley in Pennsylvania, Judge Carr of East D.C. All names once whispered with respect, now whispered with fear. All of them tied, some directly, some by carefully obscured trails of LLCs and offshore accounts, to the same shadow networks Jasmine Crockett had named. Citadel Alliance, Liberty Foundation, not companies, not nonprofits, not benefactors, but pipelines. Pipelines built to siphon justice away from the powerless and redirected toward profit. And Jasmine had just blown them wide open. But this wasn't just a federal matter now. It was a street-level awakening. In church basements, in legal aid centers, and community halls, people who had long accepted injustice as fate began showing up again. A man in Richmond brought in a folder, weathered, held together with a rubber band. "They took my father's farm in '09, he said. Said it was an easement violation. But I still got the deed." A woman in Norfolk pulled eviction notices from a plastic bag. Her eyes trembled. "They told me I had no claim. No proof. Said I'd missed a deadline I never even knew existed." But now, people were listening. Lawyers, volunteers, journalists. And for the first time in years, people who had been told they didn't belong in court were told, "You have a case." Back in Washington, D.C., the courthouse was quiet again. But this time, the silence wasn't ominous. It was sacred, the kind of silence that follows a storm. Jasmine Crockett stood alone across the street, watching people enter and exit the same courthouse that had nearly buried Rosa Freeman. They came not with torches, but with files. Not with anger, but with names. Not to burn anything down, but to reclaim what had been stolen. And then, a voice, small, tentative, from behind. "Excuse me?" Jasmine turned. A little girl stood there. 8, maybe 9, hair in tight braids, a spiral notebook clutched to her chest like armor. Are you a lawyer?" Jasmine smiled, not grand, just gently. "No, sweetie," she said. "I'm just someone who believes in truth." The girl nodded, then extended the notebook. On the cover, drawn in crayon, was a courthouse. Above it, not a gavel, a shield. Jasmine's eyes shimmered. She knelt. "You keep that," she said. "And maybe one day, you'll be the one standing on those steps." The girl nodded again and ran off. Jasmine stood there for a moment, just breathing. Behind her, the courthouse clock struck the hour. Inside, someone dropped a gavel. Not in anger, not in desperation, but with purpose. 3 weeks later, Rosa Freeman Street. The neighborhood looked the same. But something was different. The fear was gone. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was peaceful. A black sedan rolled to a stop in front of a modest brick home with green shutters and a porch swing. Jasmine stepped out first. Her heels clicked softly on the pavement. Then came Rosa, slower, but straighter, eyes steady. They walked together to the porch. Rosa paused at the steps, then turned. "It still smells like him," she whispered. Jasmine didn't ask who. She didn't need to. The door opened, not to a new life. To a life stolen, now returned. Inside, the same old clock ticked on the mantel. The same faded photo still hung near the stairs. Time hadn't erased it. Justice had restored it. Rosa walked slowly through the house. Every step felt like a blessing, like a memory being rethreaded. She turned to Jasmine. "You didn't just give me back a house," she said, voice breaking. "You gave me back my name, my history, the thing they tried to erase." Jasmine opened her mouth, but Rosa raised a hand. "Let me say it," she whispered. "I've marched. I've buried friends who never saw a day like this. I've prayed for justice so long, I forgot what it might feel like." She reached out, took Jasmine's hands. Tears fell. Real, raw. You stood up to them, and they fell. Jasmine's throat tightened, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, and held on. Capitol Hill, 1 month later. The chamber was full. Reporters lined the back. C-SPAN cameras rolled. Members of Congress, many of whom had once dismissed her, now listened in silence. Jasmine Crockett stepped to the podium. No teleprompter, no notes, just that same calm clarity. "We often speak of justice like a sword," she began. "We say it was served, that it struck down, but real justice isn't a weapon." She paused. "It's a shield, one meant to protect the unseen, the unheard, the ones who show up with plastic folders and public defenders, and walk away thinking justice is something they can't afford." She scanned the room. "And we are here," she said, "because a judge forgot that. Because a system let him. Because people like Rosa Freeman were told their lives were less valuable than a land deal." A hush. "So today, I introduce legislation to establish the first independent judicial accountability commission. With subpoena power, with oversight, with teeth." Applause, resistance, emotion. It didn't matter. She had spoken it aloud. And now it existed.